Hello, JJ.
Hello.
So today we're going to be talking about your tocophobia story.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this then. Where does your tocophobia story start?
My tocophobia story starts only about 18 months ago. Nice. That sort of, and yeah, I was 68 and we met through UK Health Radio. And I was intrigued to hear about this thing called tocophobia and wanted to hear more and have you on my show. And then as we were talking about it, you described how the most common cause is traumatic childbirth, right? And I went, oh, I had one of them. And so we talked a little bit more, and I thought, oh, yeah, no. Oh, everything that you're saying, I can see in my own life and more. That was the that was the real eye opener. It wasn't just the tocophobia that meant that I never had children in my life, but that I hadn't been able to birth so many projects and creative things in my life. And that was a massive eye opener for me.
So
Yeah.
what was the thing that I said, that made you go, oh, the clincher for you that made you think, holy moly, this is like, I think I've got this, or where there was a moment, like what was the main thing that really hooked you into it?
Well, it was when you talked about the traumatic childbirth, the traumatic birth event. Now, I'm told, because who remembers their birth? I don't think anybody remembers their birth. I think I was told by my mother that I was born with the umbilical cord around my neck. I was a blue baby and I was in an oxygen tent for 2 weeks after birth. Now, can you imagine the terror
Mm,
that that a baby would feel at that point, and then not having the reassurance constantly of your mother? I mean, that's pretty horrific. But
mm,
then there was another thing that you talked about, and that was how you'd had a miscarriage, and how when you'd noticed that you were pregnant, you saw that pregnancy test, you had this upswell of this welling up of a sheer terror, and then you'd miscarried. And
mm,
I had exactly the same experience.
mm,
Now, I was in my early 40s. I was married for a second time, or actually just about to get married for the second time. And I don't know why really. I think I hadn't had a period for such a long time, and I got a pregnancy test and tested myself and went into a complete, almost, it was a shock and a denial. And there was this surge of absolute terror, such that I've never felt ever before. It just
mm.
went coursed through my body. Didn't know what that was, didn't know where it was from, but all I remember about that period was that I just wasn't processing anything really. I mean, the terror, I think, had taken hold so strongly that I don't actually remember a great deal about all of that,
Mm.
except that a few days later I miscarried, and that was one of the most painful things, painful experiences, and I felt terrible. And then after that, it wasn't a grief or a sadness for the loss, it was anger. I was angry and I didn't know what I was angry about. And I couldn't work out what that anger was.
Mm.
But everybody around me was saying, "Oh, don't worry, you'll soon have another chance." And I was going, "Well, do you know how old I am? In your 40s, you know, it's not a given, right?" And and it so happened that it didn't happen again. And I was in denial about having had a miscarriage. Even
Mm.
I was saying things like, "Oh yeah, I just had a bad period." And I remember a friend of mine saying, "I don't think so." Really? you look terrible. You look like you've been, you're at death's door. That you haven't just had a bad period. And of course it wasn't, but it was a very early miscarriage. And so even then, though, I didn't know what that was. Even then, I didn't know what was going on with me. I didn't know what the anger was. I didn't know any of that. And so I just carried on. I just carried on thinking, oh, well, that was that then. Get myself together again, get the hormones would eventually, fall back into some kind of normality. And I carried on working. And then, of course, a few years later, my husband left me because I couldn't have children. Because, like you have talked about how you hadn't had the children talk.
Yeah.
We hadn't either. And he was very much, wanting to have children. And then it obviously just clicked with him that it wasn't going to happen with me.
Yeah.
So off he went. And my first marriage, though, when I was in my early 20s, was a bit different. And I think this is something which is, I think, from what I've read and from what I've heard from you, this is a typical tocophobia response. We talked about children. We did have the child conversation, and probably steered by me, we decided that we would adopt rather than have biological children, because there are so many children that need adoption these days. Give a child a chance. Of course, that was probably more the tocophobia speaking than me being altruistic, right?
Yeah.
And I always remember saying to friends at the time, I don't think I'll ever have children. I just feel it in my bones. I don't think I'll ever have children again. That would have been the tocophobia speaking.
Yeah.
And so I did have problems with periods, and they thought at one time I might have endometriosis. I do wonder sometimes whether the period pains, anything to do with, that whole area, again, whether that was tocophobia.
Yeah.
But there's no way necessarily of proving that. And I do remember going to a doctor and saying, I've got these pains, I've got these terrible periods. Oh, just have a couple of kids, you'll be fine. What? And when I said, no, we've decided we're not going to have children, he looked at me as if I had two heads and said, why, is there something wrong with you, sort of thing. And, that was the response that you got back then. And so my first marriage didn't last very long. And I found that relationships have been always tricky. I think that there's always been this underlying trauma or anxiety or whatever going on with me that has made it difficult for me to sustain relationships. But the other thing, looking back, that I noticed that I was never able to sustain, and I couldn't work out why, is I was never able to bring a creative project into the world. I was never able to birth anything creative of my own. And when I realized that, after we'd had our chats, and I dealt with the tocophobia, because it was quite easy for me at that point to say, oh, okay, right, that's going out the window. I'm not having that anymore. A bit like you when you were thinking, right, well, I'm going to have, when you were having your first baby and you thought, right, I'm going to have this first baby, I'm going to sort this out. I did a similar thing and dealt with that, just literally got rid of that anxiety, dealt with it, cleared it from my system. And but looking back, I saw so many things that I could have been doing, couldn't finish, couldn't bring out into the world. Why? Because there would have been an underlying fear. There was an underlying fear of me bringing anything into the world for fear that, what, I don't even know.
Yeah.
but for fear.
And I remember when we had our conversation, because you interviewed me for UK Health Radio,
Yeah.
and then you told me that you were going to deal with it, heal it in
Mm,
yourself, because you're a
mm,
healer as well.
mm.
Um, and then I remember, because you said I've got all these things, and we didn't realize the link with the creative projects at that point. But
Yeah.
I do remember
Yeah.
part of our conversation, probably because we're both got businessy backgrounds. You're in we would have had a
Mm.
conversation about the website you've been trying to get done in your book that you've been
Yes. Oh,
we
yes.
talked about a lot of that stuff. So I remember, because I'm all about like that kind of conversation. And then I remember getting an email from you within a few days of our interview, or maybe within a week, where, suddenly the website was up you've been trying to do for like a good year or two. And
Yeah, that's right.
it was like the dam had been released, or, whatever, that creative energy that had been stifled had now
Yeah.
been released. And suddenly you were getting stuff done in a way that you
Yeah.
haven't been able to before, and how incredible that was. And I think that's when you drew a link,
Yeah.
maybe, or maybe we had a conversation between that and then the pattern that was in play from your birth. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes. I mean, I think that's true. I think that it did unblock this dam that was holding my creativity back. And it must have been because we were talking about it, and I was talking about how we were talking about birthing, and of course birthing isn't just birthing a physical baby. Birthing anything creative means bringing something of your own into the world. And I suddenly realized that that was it. And yes, you're right, I got that website done in about 3 or 4 days, which I'd been trying to get done for about a year. So, you know, it was this kind of floodgate opening, and I felt so much better. But also, the interesting thing about it was that I had been doing a show with a psychiatrist in Los Angeles for about a year. And we often talked about, the two of us hosted the show, a bit like we're talking to each other now. And sometimes he and I would do this. And I would talk about always having this feeling of anxiety that never quite, this feeling of not being safe that never quite left me. And the beautiful thing about the work with Tokophobia was that left me.
Wow.
Being able to name it,
Yeah.
being able to then let it go. I not only let go of the tokophobia, the thing that has the name, but I realized that was that feeling of not being safe, that deep, deep seated anxiety within me that stopped me from being in any way creative,
Yeah.
physically or in other ways. So, that was extraordinary. And when I realized that, because one day I just realized, oh, I don't have that anymore. That's not there anymore. Oh, wow. Okay. It
That's
was it
huge.
was fantastic.
That's
Yeah.
huge. And I remember when we think about, I don't know if you mentioned during this conversation your birth and how you were, I know you mentioned it, but the reason was because you had your cord wrapped around your neck
Yeah.
and you're a blue baby. And
Mm-hmm.
when you think about that situation and how you were strangled, stifled, suffocated, however we want
Yeah.
to whatever language we want to use to describe that situation, but you weren't able to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, and how that has showed up in your tocophobia is that you weren't able to breathe life into projects.
Exactly.
And that
Yeah.
pattern, that it's just so incredible to kind of see the pattern replaying. And I see this so much in my client, that the way that they were
Mm.
born. And when you think about, and we are going to talk about this in other episodes, but
Yeah.
just seeing this in your story, that the parallels between your own birth experience and how that showed up for you in your life and how your tocophobia manifested is just, and then seeing the release from that with your healing is just such an incredible story. really.
I'm getting emotional thinking about it. We seem to be getting emotional
I
on
know.
these podcasts quite a lot, but no, it is an emotional thing, and it came too late for me to have a physical baby, a physical
Mm,
child. But I remember going through menopause, and there was a moment going through menopause where I just suddenly realized, oh wow, um, now I can't, even if I wanted to, and that brought up a whole wellspring of grief at that point,
mm,
because then the possibility was always kind of there before,
yeah,
but then when you've gone through menopause, it kind of isn't anymore, and you realize that those days are gone and you've lost out.
yeah. And so do you
And
think,
so,
sorry, I was going,
no, go on.
do you think you made a decision to not have kids, or do you think it was you simply didn't decide? There was an absence of a decision. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I do see what you mean.
Like
And
because when I think I just didn't decide to. So it was like, of course, by not deciding, I was deciding, as
yeah,
opposed to saying, no, kids isn't for me. Like, and actually kind of consciously saying that or being aware of it. Like, where were you on that?
it's difficult for me to tell at this point, but I think that where I was that I didn't think I could have children because I had this kind of almost an innate belief, understanding that it wasn't going to happen to me. Now, you might say, okay, that's become a self fulfilling prophecy, but there was this deep belief that having children would not be a thing that I would do. Having my own children would not be a thing that I would do. And it didn't even go into the, decision to or not to. It was almost like I just always felt that it wasn't going to happen. And then in the conversation with my then husband, it was um, it was around that. It was around, me not feeling that I would ever be able to, but why don't we adopt?
Yeah. And it's
Because I had nothing against the children.
yeah,
Nothing against children at all. In fact, love children, get on very well with children, always have done. I'm a bit of a child myself, but you talk about this as well. It's the babies, and
yeah,
I was that person who, if you put a baby in my arms, would go, okay, and pass it on as quickly as possible, right? Because you just kind of didn't know what to do with the baby. It kind of brought up feelings that you didn't know how to handle.
yeah,
Um, and I would lose touch with friends who had babies because, apart from the fact that mothers with small children don't have the same time to hang out with single people who, and they're always talking about their children, and you kind of think, oh, for God's sake, wish they talk about something else. And all these things go on,
yeah,
and just being honest about it, right?
yeah,
And so, yeah, but it was the babies. It was the small babies who cry and vomit and just they're shoved into your arms.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting
Um,
you were saying that when you're talking about with your husband, you said I thought that kids wasn't something that you would do.
yeah,
And its use of would over could, because would
yes,
implies a decision, whereas
yeah,
could implies, oh, I can't have them, like, whether it's infertility or there's something there that was stopping you, but would is I'm stopping me. Do you see what I mean?
yeah, yeah, I do, and I think that I'm not too sure. I mean, I wouldn't be I wouldn't be too put too much on that because when I'm thinking back, it's a long time ago. So you're talking about 50 years ago or so, nearly 50 years ago. And the one thing I am sure of is that I did always feel that I would not be able to or could not have them. Okay, so would not be able to have them because I felt it would not happen to me.
Right.
Not that I couldn't,
Mm.
but that it wasn't going to happen. That's why I was saying, maybe it was a self-fulfilling prophecy, but it was almost like I had this, no, there was something in me that said, no,
Yeah, that's
no,
not happening. Yeah,
yeah,
we're not
that's not
going there.
happening.
Yeah, yeah, we're
Yeah.
not going down that route.
So there was something in the subconscious that was saying this, but I didn't
Yeah.
know what that was.
No, no.
And I do remember somebody saying, "Oh yeah, you just wait, just wait." Yeah, we all say that, but you just wait, well,
I'm still waiting.
still
Not
waiting.
happening. Not happening.
Um, yeah. So, and people do treat you differently if you don't have children. They treat you differently. They assume all sorts of things, and it's not always a particularly easy place to be,
Mm.
being childless.
Yeah,
Um, and looking back, I say now that I wish we'd met years ago.
yeah,
My life would have been completely different,
yeah,
completely different.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, JJ. Is there anything more that, like, when I think about your story and how, I think one of the things that um, maybe some people might be interested to know is maybe a little bit more about your, like, the way that you went about getting rid of it for yourself or clearing it, like, because it sounds like, we're both here having chats about, well, we just had it and we just got rid of
Yeah,
it.
we cleared it, got
Yeah,
rid
yeah,
of
yeah,
it.
we cleared it. Oh yeah, it's just like go make a cup of tea in the kitchen, just go and clear it. And so obviously, be little, just talk a little bit more about
Yeah,
that. And I
yeah,
know we'll probably dive more into the healing part, in other
we
episodes.
will.
I'm sure that's a question that people are like, well, what did you do?
Yeah, yeah. It's a
Roughly,
good
give us a
question.
little bit of an inkling as to what you did to kind of clear that in yourself.
Well, it is a good question. Now, first of all, part of it was just being able to name the thing,
Yeah,
because especially if you're working on yourself, if
yeah,
if you can't pinpoint what it is, then it's very difficult to do the work to, let go or clear whatever that is. So half of the work was done when I realized that it was a thing and it had a name. And oh, okay, now I know what that is.
yeah,
And I can do something about that. And understanding that it's a deep seated anxiety, and knowing where that sat. Everything sits in the body. Everything's there's anxieties, traumas, they kind of lurk at various places in our bodies. And I kind of knew that this anxiety lived in here, in my,
your chest.
um, chest area here. And so what I did was just make a commitment to let go
Yeah,
of all this anxiety that's been dogging me all my life. To what end?
yeah,
Hasn't exactly helped me,
yeah,
right? So letting go of all of that has not been helpful to me throughout my life. So making that conscious decision, that's making the mental decision to let go of that. And then allowing it, working on my body internally to allow it to leave my body physically.
yeah,
So relaxing those areas where I felt it, mainly in the chest, and allowing that to flow out of me. And I know that sounds a bit odd, but it's a metaphor for what actually happens, and you can kind of visualize it in your mind's eye, of this package, if you like, of energy
yeah,
just dissolving and flowing out of your system.
yeah,
So working on the mind, and it was very easy to do that because I was ready to, this is the other thing, I was ready to let it go. I mean, good grief, we're talking about nearly 60 years of
yeah,
this, or no, well, all my life
yeah,
basically of this, but thinking about from childbearing age, you know I was ready to let go.
Yeah.
It might be too late for me to have children, but I was ready to let go. So it was very easy for me to come to that point mentally and say, right, this isn't, I'm not having this anymore. It's going.
Yeah.
And then clearing it from my system.
Yeah.
But, again, I say the key to me clearing it from my system without any help from anybody was knowing what it is and being able to name it
Yeah.
and being able to shift it.
Yeah.
And it's quite a simple thing to do that, but it's not at the same time. It can be quite tricky at the same time
Yeah.
unless you have all the pieces in place.
Mm. And so you mentioned, I mean, there's a few things that you noticed pretty quickly in terms of getting your website up and things like that. But
Yeah.
and the anxiety feeling gone. But is there what else have you become aware of in terms of differences since being able to since shedding the anxiety and the fear? Like what else has come to your awareness?
Well, yeah, a lot of things, a lot of things have been happening, like being able to work on things, being able to create, be creative, but also relationships and friendships. I've found that the quality of my relationships and friendships have changed, and
Mm.
also I don't have the problem with kids, babies anymore. I mean,
Oh, really?
yeah, I can coo over a baby now. And I could go over a baby.
Oh,
Before I was the cat woman. I had my fur babies, as some people call them. I
yeah,
don't
yeah,
like that term myself, but yeah. But now I can actually coo over a baby and say, "Oh,
maybe that's the
sweet."
litmus test. Maybe that's the main test, the tocophobia test, is just give them the baby, see if they want to eat their thighs or not. If they don't want to eat them,
Yeah.
twitch their thighs, and then they probably got tocophobia.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. When you hear people say, "Oh, it's just so edible," you think
yeah, yeah,
in the past, you think, for God's
yeah.
sake,
Yeah, what?
get a grip.
Yeah,
Um, but now, yeah, I can see it. Yeah, I
yeah, yeah,
totally
yeah.
get it.
That's okay. That's brilliant. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, JJ, for sharing that. We're going to be diving into a lot of the themes raised as part of these stories and other people's stories as part of their tocophobia journey throughout the whole of this podcast. And so,
Yeah. Well, we'll be talking more about it, and I'm sure
yeah,
that more things will come up, and we can talk about more of the things that I didn't achieve in my life. I have achieved some things, but we can talk about all the things, the creative things that
yeah,
were me.
yeah. That's
That
it. That's why I think we've got to. That deserves its whole episode because that's
Yeah,
such a huge part of the life of a human is to be creative, right?
yeah,
That I think warrants its own. We need to have a separate conversation about that.
yeah. We will do. We'll do that definitely.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, JJ. And yeah, and we'll see everyone next time on the Tik-Tokophobia podcast.
Absolutely, and thank you for helping me get to this point.